All right, you're going to open up Marshfield Dreams to page 123, and we'll read Fresh Eggs. And on the top of the page, there's a photo of Lainey's 4th grade picture, and that's on page 123. Fresh Eggs. The 5 remaining chicks grew fast. They gobbled up the bag of chicken feed in less than 2 weeks, and Dad had to go back for another bag, and another right after that. As the chicks got older, their looks changed. They weren't quite so round and fuzzy anymore, but what they lost in cuteness, they gained in spunk. Pretty soon they could hop out of their box and run around the backyard. They'd stay in a group walking around, pecking at seeds, ants, and spiders. The chicks stayed outside most of the time now, even at night. The way they looked, all wide-eyed and alert, made it seem they were thinking about something, even though Jimmy insisted their brains were too tiny to think very much. They would have been good pets, except for one problem. They pooped all over the place. I tried to avoid stepping on it, but you couldn't always see it on the grass. The poop got on our shoes, and we tracked it into the house, staining the rugs and stairs, and making everything stink to the high heavens. Mom went absolutely nuts. "Take off those shoes! Leave them outside! Do you want to clean up the stuff? I never, ever should have taken those chicks into the house in the first place." "Easy," Dad said, helping her clean up the mess. "Remember, fresh eggs are coming." "I'm about to come unglued," she shot back. Early one Saturday morning, I heard something outside of my window, a sound that was strangely familiar. When I rushed into the kitchen, I heard it again. Cock-a-doodle-doo! Some of the other kids ran into the kitchen, too. Dad stumbled in, half asleep. "What time is it?" he asked, peering at the clock. 5:15 a.m. "Hey, Dad, they're roosters," Jimmy said, laughing. "Roosters?" Dad went to the window, looking out into the thin morning light. "Are you sure?" "Yeah, I was just watching them crow," Jimmy said. "Look, they're all doing it." We pressed our faces to the window in the direction of the backyard. Sure enough, they were all cock-a-doodle-dooing. "Roosters, roosters!" Jimmy, Tommy, and I started jumping around, screaming with laughter. The little kids looked confused. "Roosters are boy chickens," Lainey explained. "They don't lay eggs. Only hens do." "They're not going to be hens?" Bobby asked. "Nope." Right then, Mom walked into the kitchen carrying Kathy. "They're roosters, Mom," I told her. Mom stared at Dad. "Fresh eggs," she said to him. "Isn't that what you promised? Isn't that what you said? It looks like we're going to be waiting a long time for those eggs." Lainey and I giggled. "I'm sorry," Dad said. He looked sort of dazed. "I had no idea they were roosters. I mean, the man never told us that, did he, Lainey?" "Nope," she shook her head. "Guess I'll have to change Jasmine's name to a boy name." The sound was loud and shrill. "Cock-a-doodle-doo!" "The neighbors will love this," Dad muttered. "Just what this family needs," Mom said, looking down at Kathy. 5 more boys in the house. So I just want you to think about, what did Ralph Fletcher do great as a writer in this chapter? So go back into Fresh Eggs, and you can go right on page 123, and it talks about the chicks being round and fuzzy. That's imagery. It talks about they could hop and run. Those are some verbs. So what I want for you to do is to find a different spot in the text where Ralph Fletcher did something, that he did something strong in his writing. Take a look on page 124 and reread that first complete paragraph starting with "the chicks stayed outside." Reread that and use your sticky note to jot down what Ralph Fletcher did well. You can pause this while you're doing that. Okay, once you have your sticky complete for Fresh Eggs, it's time to continue and read Fletcher on page 127. And again, you're listening for what Ralph Fletcher's doing well as a writer. All right, on the top of page 127, there's another Fletcher baby, which is Johnny in the playpen. Fletcher. Jimmy wanted a hunting crossbow. There was no way Dad would let him get one, so Jimmy had to settle for a bow, but it wasn't a toy. It was a real bow with heavy string and pointed arrows that could pierce the bark of a tree. In the garage, Dad helped him string it. "Your ancestors were English bowmakers," Dad said. "The Fletchers who lived a long time ago. See this part of the arrow with the feathers on it? That's called the fletching." "Yeah," Jimmy said, running his hand down the smooth fiberglass bow. He was barely listening. The only thing he cared about was getting to shoot. But first, Dad had to repeat for the 10th time his safety lecture. A bow and arrow is a deadly weapon. Don't ever point the arrow at anybody. Shoot only at the target. Stand back when somebody is shooting. Okay, Jimmy replied. Dad followed us into the backyard where he had draped a plastic target over a bale of hay. Jimmy pulled back the bowstring, released the first arrow, and hit it, swamped the outer ring of the target. Good shot, Dad said. Okay, have fun. Just be careful. We will, Jimmy promised. The moment Dad went inside, Jimmy turned to look at me. Watch this, he said. Before I could say a word, Jimmy had fitted an arrow into the string, pulled it back, and shot it straight up. The arrow flew like a rocket until I could see nothing but a dot, a point of light glistening at the top of the sky. A second later, the arrow looked bigger. It was coming down. Look out, Jimmy yelled. We both scrambled to get out of the way, but I hesitated, not sure which way to go. I guessed right. The arrow brushed past my ear and embedded itself in the grass less than 1 inch from my sneaker. That was close, I said. Hey, Dad came down the back steps, practically running towards us. From the angry look on his face, I knew he had seen the whole thing. He grabbed the bow from Jimmy and sent us both to our bedroom for the rest of the day. That night, I laid awake in bed, reliving my close escape. When that arrow brushed past my ear, it made a soft hissing sound, as if my ancestors were trying to whisper to me. All right, we're not going to do any writing any sticky notes on this chapter. We're going to wait and do that for the next chapter, tripods. So tripods continues on page 131. Dad paid a man to clear the acre of woods right behind our house. On Saturday morning, we watched him bulldoze bushes and trees. When he had finished, there was a stack of pine logs, each about 30 feet long and 6 inches wide at the thickest point, piled at one side of the clearing. The logs gave Jimmy an idea. He asked me and Tommy to help him carry 9 of them to the middle of the clearing. Put them in threes, Jimmy said. He directed us to lay the logs so they could fit together. Andy came over from next door. What are you doing? He asked. You'll see. Jimmy took some twine and started working on a knot at the middle place where the 3 logs overlapped, like this. You know how to tie them together? I asked. I'm going to use a lash knot, Jimmy replied. It's too loose. No, it's not, Jimmy said. He finished lashing the logs together and stood up. Now we're going to lift them, but we can't do it by ourselves. We're going to need a lot of kids. I'll help, Bobby offered. Okay, Jimmy said with a laugh, but we need some big kids too. Pretty soon my friends Steve and Larry showed up. Lee Parker, who was already a junior high, came over too, and Jimmy wasted no time putting them to work. We'll need 2 kids on each log, he said. Ralph and Larry, you guys lift the middle. Everybody ready? Yeah, okay, lift. Larry and I got in the middle and began to lift. As we did, the 3-legged thingamajig began to rise from the ground. Jimmy was right about the rope. The knot tightened as the middle part went higher. Come on, Jimmy yelled. Push, lift, up, up. Sweating, gasping, grunting, we lifted the logs. Pretty soon the middle part was over our heads, and we couldn't reach it anymore. Larry got a long 2x4 and used that to keep it pushing skyward. That's good, Jimmy cried. That's high enough. Everybody cheered. I wiped the sweat from my face and looked up. The top of the tripod stood about 25 feet off the ground, but we didn't have any time to rest. 2 more to go, Jimmy yelled, and we started erecting the second tripod. On this one, he added an extra rope where he lashed the logs together. When we got the structure into place, the rope hung down from the middle. Tommy grabbed the rope and swung back and forth. My dad's got some extra tires, Larry offered, for a rope swing. We can do that later, Jimmy yelled. Come on, 1 more to go. By the time we had finished, we were exhausted, panting like dogs. But we had done it. All 3 tripods were standing. It was a typical Jimmy stunt, much harder than anything a teacher would ever ask him to do in school. Jimmy would never earn a grain for imagining those tripods, let alone getting them built. But I knew what he'd done, and the other kids did too. In some ways, my brother was a genius. Dad came outside. All the kids kept quiet while he made a careful inspection, slowly walking around the structures, peering up, touching the logs. What are they anyway? He finally asked. Tripods, Jimmy explained. Tripods, Dad nodded. You realize if they fall apart and some kid breaks his neck, I'm responsible. They won't fall apart, Jimmy said. Dad pushed one of the logs, but it hardly moved. No, I guess they're not going any place, he said. They seem solid. They're solid, all right, Jimmy told him. What are they for? Dad asked, smiling. I just wanted to build them, Jimmy shrugged, to see if I could. Next morning when I stepped outside, the sight of those huge tripods took me by surprise, even though I'd helped build them. They look so strange, as if creatures from another planet had chosen my backyard of all places to land their spaceships. All right, let's go back into the text to find an example of some strong writing, and there's a lot of it. I do want to take a look on page 133, about halfway down the page, on page 133. So Jimmy's yelling, "Come on, push, lift." Up, up, sweating, gasping, grunting, we lifted the logs. What is sweating, gasping, and grunting? See if you can put that idea into words. What did Ralph Fletcher do well there? And then you're done for today.